In this episode, we interview Evan Marshall, VP of Partnerships at Black Menswear. Black Menswear is a for-profit organization that works to improve the perception of the Black man and encourages positivity within our community. So thanks everyone for tuning into this episode. Today we have Evan Marshall, who is VP of Partnerships at Black Menswear. Evan, thank you for your time tonight.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So per usual, give us a mission statement or high-level overview of what Black Menswear is.
Oh, God, yeah. Black Menswear's mission is to change the narrative of how men of color are portrayed in the media. We've kind of started off being known as the originator of the flash mob. So if you've ever seen those videos, photos of 200, 250 Black men in suits, that's us. But now we've really built it into a multicultural agency that focuses on creating content, storytelling, and experiential activations around catered towards the upwardly mobile Black male millennial.
All right, done. Mic drop. Yeah. If we had mics. Why you? Why is this something you wanted to get involved in?
Because that's who I am. Obviously, I like to consider myself as upwardly mobile. But even outside of that, one of the things with me is like, oftentimes, across all underrepresented groups, not just even with being African-American space, but AAPI, Latinx, and LGBTQ+, we're often viewed as monolithic or homogenous, and we're not. So one of the things I like to touch base on, obviously, like, you know, Afro-Latinos, like if you look at somebody that's Dominican and Cuban, they literally speak different Spanish than somebody from Mexico City. Somebody that's grew up in Detroit and you're Black has different learned experiences. Somebody that grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, or somebody that grew up in Jackson, Mississippi has different learned experiences than somebody that grew up in the south side of Chicago. But even though they're Black, how they view things, the type of things from an advertising point of view that's going to speak with them, that's going to resonate with them, while there's going to be subtle cultural nuances that are the same, they still are different people because they have different backgrounds, different races, different socioeconomic status. So how do we go about telling that story and highlighting that we're all not the same? And if we can kind of dispel the fact we're all not the same, that kind of goes with dispelling the myth of that, you know, we're all thugs, danger, and things of that nature within society.
Okay. My next question was going to be, and why is this important? But it sounds like demystifying and clarifying and is kind of like one of the main motivations for why.
100%. Yeah. We got to do a plug, right? So there's a show that Tina Knowles lost in Beyonce's mom that just came out on Discovery Plus called Profile the Black Man, which is literally, it's Sway, DeRay McKeeson, a bunch of people in it highlighting Black businesses and Black owners that are kind of changing the narrative of what it means to be a Black man in this country. We're featured on there, so check it out. It's on Discovery Plus. We're in the first episode. It's a 4-part docuseries, so we're on that. But like to your point, and that's really what it's about. And it's demystifying that. So if you look at a lot of the examples of, you look at like what we like to say is the browning of America we're in right now in terms of the Stop Asian Hate movement with Black Lives Matter movement, ever since you kind of had the nuances of George Floyd, now you kind of have the representation of like people still view me as a threat. One of the things, there's a guy that we work with named Doc Iggy, who's from Dallas, Texas. He went viral during this time because he had this meme that said, hated in a hoodie, hero with a knife, right? But when you think about it, it's like, if he actually had a knife in his hand, you're afraid of him, but he's an orthopedic surgeon. But you would never know that he's an orthopedic surgeon. Okay,
that's
the knife, but you would never know that. But if he has a knife in his hand, you're not afraid of him because you're coming to him and you view him as this, right? You view him like this is somebody who's literally going to perform surgery on you to help you be better as a person, to help your well-being. But if you saw him in a hoodie walking down the street, you'd be afraid of him. So how can you, at the evening, you're afraid of me, but at the same time, by day, you're coming to, you're looking to value, hey, doctor, I need your assistance, right? So that's kind of dispelling, telling those stories and just highlighting, obviously, like Black excellence isn't always rooted in rappers, athletes, and entertainers. Like there's doctors, lawyers, engineers, philanthropists, mentors, business owners, and that's kind of what we focus on highlighting.
Yeah, that reminds me of, so one of the organizations we've interviewed in the past is Hip Hop for Change and Kaffer J. He's the, I think, executive director there, and he always wears some like really statement clothing, and one of the hoodies he wears is "I am a white woman." Yeah. so yeah, just things like that are really powerful and makes you think. Of like, first of all, like, why is he wearing this? And then what is it meaning? And then I think it just leads to conversation, which is great. And then it leads to reflection, which is even better. And then it's just kind of that process that a lot of people have to go through. And I've gone through, even though I was born and raised in Chicago, there's still a lot of learnings that I've had to go through. How do you feel like, do you think the landscape is improving since, of course, the conversation Black Lives Matter, George Floyd? Are we making progress, or there's still a lot of work to do?
I mean, there's still a lot of work to do. We are making progress. Yep. I mean, even now that like I said, we're still in the midst of the browning of America, so we're having these conversations now, right? What needs to happen is it can't be the spur of the moment and things fall off. Even if you look at like, I'm blanking on the woman who was unfortunately stabbed in New York, the Asian woman who was stabbed there. But like Stop Asian Hate happened, then it kind of died off. And then you needed something else really bad for it to happen. And now you're having that conversation again. That's what can't happen.
Right,
so like in terms of moving forward,
sustainable.
The conversation needs, because it doesn't change. We don't need to have another Ahmaud Arbery, another George Floyd to be like, oh, see, this is happening again. Like what we need to have, what are we doing? Like we like to say, impact over influence to kind of continue the conversation, even conversations such as this. So people to kind of expose themselves to different conversations, different experiences, different situations to kind of put themselves and immerse themselves in different markets and different environments.
Yeah. And I feel like COVID has not really, I think there's pros and cons of COVID in terms of like personal reflection. But I think one of the cons of COVID is what I found is one of the ways that we could start moving towards the more equitable world and having these conversations and really having empathy is being in person with each other and being in communities that we maybe don't normally cross paths with. But COVID has kind of put a halt to that. Has that happened with Black Menswear? Has it been hard to have these flash mobs or to keep that conversation going, even though it's virtual?
That's a good conversation. So we did do a 10-city global tour last year. So we did Atlanta, Houston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Paris. We did 2,200 people across each of those markets. We have 6 cities coming up this year. We have New Orleans, which is next month, Baltimore. We're doing Ghana, Nigeria, Toronto, and Miami. Shout out to Miami is a big one. So actually December 18th is official Black Menswear Miami Flash Mob Day. The Miami-Dade County gave us that proclamation last year. So that was kind of cool. But to your point in terms of being individual, honestly, some of the best thing about it is literally just like the buzz and the environment people get, the public see when they're doing it, right? Honestly, like I never forget, we did New York last year. So we were in Brooklyn, right there in the Brooklyn Park, right there by the bridge. And there's like this, it was this beautiful, not really like a brownstone, but it had this beautiful door front and it had a door and it kind of had these 2 steps to go around. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Let's just kind of utilize it. So we have like 40, 50 guys all kind of something. And this old white guy, I mean, he has to be 70, 75 years old. He like peeks his head outside. Like, what the hell is going on here? But then he looks and then kind of like walks. And then like, I'm over here kind of like directing it. And he comes up. So he's like, what's going on? And I kind of explained to him, he's like, this is amazing. So like, you would assume like this old white guy, like, who are these black men on my property? And he would come like, what are you doing out here? The park is across the street.
Oh, it was his property?
So the park is right. The park is right here. It's literally just across the street. It's just like the staircase. So it's not like we were like physically taking over. It's just literally the staircase. But he literally came up like, this is amazing. And he like stood there, watched, was talking, interacting with the guys. And that's what it's about. Because he looked at, okay, nobody's doing anything wrong. Like they're not touching the door. They're not doing it. They're just taking photos. And what if we explain what the purpose of it? He loved it. And now I got that guy's number and him and I talk and communicate all the time now. So it's like next time you're in New York, we got to go to coffee. And that's really what it's about. It's just having conversations with each other and even giving credit to him to opening the door. And being like, what's going on here? Versus like the get off my lawn approach, which would have been the easier reaction regardless of color, to be like, who are these people on my thing? It was like, okay, what's going on here? Let me go inquire about this. Oh, this is great. Now, how can I support you all moving forward? And that's kind of just, honestly, just people don't talk to each other. And even to your point, even prior to the pandemic, we just didn't have conversations with each other enough.
Man. And that's a good example of like measuring impact is stories like that. How else are you able to measure the impact that your organization is having? Is it just the increased growth, the increased scale?
Yeah, obviously, but honestly, man, followers great. Obviously, we have the shows, podcast opportunities. I mean, obviously, we do monetize it, but honestly, it's just the stories and the impact of the guys coming. Like, I'll never forget, we did DC one year. There's a kid that went to Howard University, which is a really good nursing program, and he told my business partner, Deandre, like, hey man, to be honest with you, I was considering dropping out of school, but after being here for this hour and a half, I'm good to go. Because he was just around all these other men that looked like him. He felt the energy, despite that's all, it was the motivation that he needed to kind of continue to move forward and kind of continue to make an impact on it. So that's kind of those are the stories, those are the impact that we have that kind of keep things going.
What's the future have to hold? I know you started talking about going international and going to Ghana.
Honestly, right now it's kind of really more so building at the multicultural agency standpoint. We're like really kind of getting into brand advertising. So a lot of what we're doing right now is working with brands on content development to really do authentic storytelling around them. Doing consultative marketing and agency work with them. Really challenging them. A lot of times you want to say, are you looking to speak to this demographic for representation, or are you looking to actually target this demographic? Those are two entirely different things.
What's the difference?
Good question. Yeah. So for example, we just did a program with NASCAR, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times people think of NASCAR as like, okay, a brand could work with Bubba Wallace. And it's like, okay, Bubba Wallace is great. He's black, but 65% of his social media followers are white men. Why? Because he's a NASCAR driver. That's who watches NASCAR. So if you're a brand and you're working with Bubba Wallace, are you actually speaking to the black audience? You're not. Does he provide representation for you within that space? Yes, he does. Both are necessary because you need to have representation for Bubba Wallace, especially to that white, rural, southern male audience at the same time. But if you're doing this with the assumption of that he's going to bring in black consumers, he's not going to do that. So what is your ultimate end goal here? Once you kind of challenge the question, a lot of times when they're picking these programs, they don't think about it from that lens. And then from that, okay, now you need different. So if you want to speak to them, that's different messaging, different storytelling, different talent selections. What the content has to look like, it has to be different because you need the same people. Content needs to speak to people in different ways. So really kind of helping them with that. So we just said we did a deal with NASCAR because they're looking to expand into metropolitan audiences. Like if you think about NASCAR, for example, even all their races, Daytona 500 is in the middle, it's in Daytona, Florida. Yep. Talladega, Alabama is in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. Charlotte Motor Speedway is in Martinsville. Even in Chicago, if you wanted to go to Chicago Motorland Speedway, it's in Joliet. Yep. So if you wanted to be like, hey, I have tickets to go to the race, it's not that easy to be like, hey, you want to meet me in Soldier Field? I got 2 tickets. You have to figure out a way to get all the way to Joliet. So it's not even from a race thing. It's just not accessible. So the deal we did with them, they did a race in the LA Coliseum, downtown LA, where the USC plays, which is a .25 short circuit track. And they're doing one in downtown Portland. And they're doing all these ones in the cities because they realize they have to expand the audience. Yeah. So they partnered with us to kind of increase the exposure. And great example, 65% of the tickets they sold to that race were first time ever NASCAR participants. First time ever going to a NASCAR race.
Wow. And what do you foresee as those changes in marketing tactics and opening and diversifying, I guess, the people that they're trying to reach? What long-term changes do you see that having?
I just think you just need to be having more diverse voices like in the room. Like actually people that are kind of even like you. Like you don't necessarily need to be somebody representative of that audience, but even if you're going to hire that people, hire somebody that's actually in tune with understanding and learning communication about that culture, right? Mm-hmm. I think part of the negative stereotype all the time is that you can't work on LGBTQ marketing and not be a member of that community. I'm not, but I have plenty of friends are. I have conversations with them so I can understand in terms of like, I'm not necessarily be able to speak, but I have representation to where I can gut check and have pulse check around those conversations. For example, with you, like to your point, you work in nonprofits, you probably have to speak to a lot of people within the Black and brown communities on a regular basis, right? So you might, even if you're doing a campaign, if you're working with these businesses, you'll have a different perspective because you're not living in just a singular world. Yeah. That's what kind of needs to be happening across all sides. So we just need to kind of be able to communicate moving forward. There's a tweet going around today with this platform called The Stadium, which is a sports website. Mm-hmm. And there's this photo of Shaquille O'Neal. He goes like this because he's like a Q, like Omega Psi Phi. And that's one of the prominent things that they do, like if you're a Q. And the caption on the tweet is that face you make when somebody says, now it's time for a goofy pic. And it's like, nobody's really mad, but it's like clearly, and it's okay that the person who wrote that didn't understand what Shaquille O'Neal was doing in that photo. You don't have to. The problem is not that person who tweeted out and said, the problem is there's nobody else on his team that before he published that,
it could be was
able to say like, oh, this is not a goofy pic. What he's actually doing is this, right? So then now you have Jamel Hill, Manuel Acho, Ryan Clark, all these people tweeting so who's gonna tell them what's really good? Nobody's mad, but it's just like, that's just lack of having diversity within the team.
Yeah, and this kind of leads to a philosophical-ish question for you personally. How much personal responsibility do you think us as humans should take into diving deep and learning more about diverse cultures? And then, like, how much time do you think we should individually invest in that? Because it's like a rabbit hole.
Oh, wow. But I can take that in a myriad of different ways. I think that's really big. I think part of that, just being 100% true, because we live in the United States. The United States is a very capitalistic society. Mm-hmm. I just spent 2 weeks in France in November, and I'm actually probably about to move back to France for about 6 weeks when my lease is up in June. Because one of the things you get from over there, you just don't live in the capitalistic mindset. Like the United States, think about it, is work, 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 work.
Yep.
Most companies give you 14 days PTO. And you don't, how many people do you know that don't even take 14 days? They take 3 to 4, or if you got 14 days PTO, but if you went to your boss and said, hey, I'm gonna do 14 days in a row, they're gonna be like, what do you mean you're gonna do 14 days in a row? Like, well, this is how I wanna use it. Whereas if you go to Europe, they have to do holiday. Holiday is the minimum 4 weeks that you have to take. Like, you have to take that. Also, you go to Paris, there's a government rule to where you don't have to respond to work emails after 6:30 p.m. Like, they legally can't fire you. There's no job in this country, in the U.S., where like, hey, I'm just not gonna respond to this email after 6:30. They're like, what are you talking about? So, like, I think to your point, because we live in such a capitalist mindset, it's all about work, 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 me, because the money is the end goal. That defeats the opportunity to, you know what, let's just kind of just enjoy each other. Like, if you think of, and I think one of the things about the pandemic that was great, not great because there's a lot of lives lost, but that was positive, was the rediscovery of parks. When you couldn't go places, you had people that were just literally going to do picnics. Like, hey, let's do wine in the park. Let's go to a picnic. Let's just hang out. And then when you were seeing people, you were just interacting with people because you had not seen people before. So I think that was one of the positives. It reminded people in terms of like the emotional well-being you can get from human connectivity.
Okay. And it was, COVID could have been like an accelerator of that, because I know like all camping gear and bikes and everything was sold out. So people were out and about more for sure. But I'm trying to understand, and this is something I'm personally always reflecting on, is especially doing all these nonprofits, and we interview so many different types of nonprofits and for-profits, but of course, but things from like women who've been trafficked, things from like youth who've been formerly incarcerated, the prison to high school pipeline, to veterans, to mental health, to suicide prevention, and all of these categories of organizations. There's some sort of like expectation of like, if you're in this, you should know these things, or say these things or not say these things. And I feel like the more people that we've been interviewing, I'm personally like, where should I spend my time in learning about this stuff? It can be overwhelming. So I'm trying to find like a good balance of like, how much is enough information to not offend, And so I think that's maybe like an extreme version of a challenge that some people have is, cool, these topics, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Asian hate, like how much education should we personally expect ourselves to do to then like not get in trouble or not get in enough trouble, like in conversations?
That's a good question. I would say it's less on education and more on empathizing. Because a lot of the things which you have to understand is empathizing with this person's plight, empathizing with this person's situation. If you look a lot of like the push against people that are against Black Lives Matter, it's like you hear the kind of like, oh, well, I didn't do this. It's like, it's not about you. You have to empathize with how that person feels, right? Because like at the end of the day, because you might not be able to control how that person's receiving this. So that's kind of what it's about. Even if you look at a lot of, like, even the Stop Asian Hate, it's like, okay, understanding, like, even then, like, what's the best way? The misogyny of Asian women that's kind of gone on for years in terms of how that's kind of portrayed and led into why you see a lot of the Asian women are being victimized in this situation. Because, like, if you look at, like, movies and things like that, they're very overly sexualized. And that goes back to, the opiate crisis when they first came over here, right? Yep. So, like, that's subconsciously part of in the society. That doesn't mean that my ancestors, my forefathers, or yours did that to that people, but you have to empathize with that person as to why they're viewing it that way. So, like, and if you empathize with that person, then you're willing to be educated. So you can't just read and be educated. You have to empathize with that person first.
Yeah. how do you learn empathy?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
I feel like part of it might be exposure, like just being out where you're seeing actual human responses to things that are happening versus, messaging, texting, commenting. You don't have like an emotional exchange in those cases. And I'm just like hypothesizing here and trying to figure out how one learns empathy. Obviously, you could be taught it through family members, but yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But even if you look at like a lot of like when you look at the blue states versus the red states, like even the concept that we all vote, like the U.S. should really be set up more like the European Union. We should be a bunch of individual countries to all share the same economic power and a dollar and kind of have commonalities that we vote on. But kind of going to say like earlier, like if somebody grows up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is going to be, in terms of your level of exposure to diversity, is going to be drastically different than somebody lives in Miami, Florida. Because Miami, Florida, everybody you meet is Cuban, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Haitian. Like it's a very, like you could literally live in Miami and English doesn't need to be your first language. You could speak Spanish every single day of your life. You don't have to speak English. If you go to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, that's not the world. Right. So the fact that those people on both sides are having to vote for the same leader, that doesn't make sense because they live their lived experiences are entirely different. So the fact that we as a society have forced them to have to vote the same, it's not going to happen. So to your point, obviously in either way, it's tough for either side to empathize with each other because they just don't know what that person's world is, right? So like if you're from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, how are you going to empathize with somebody that grew up in Little Haiti? And how's that person from Little Haiti going to empathize with that person from South Dakota? They're not going to because they literally do not understand another person's world, but yet they live in the same country. So it's supposed to tell you that we do share the same lived experiences, but we don't.
Okay. No. Who have been some of your heroes and mentors growing up?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Mentors, I would say.
Or inspirations, yeah.
Yeah. One of my big persons actually just recently passed, Sidney Poitier, was big for me. He's Bohemian. I'm a really big believer. I personally believe he did more for the civil rights movement than anybody else because if you look at it, not only he got the Congressional Medal of Freedom from Obama, but if you look at what he was doing, I mean, he won Best Actor in 1965, right? So it's like, if you think about that, that's literally the year the civil rights movement was passed. Mm-hmm. So the same way where you had Martin Luther King marching, you had him on screen creating this space, making it, not like for Little Bird, safe in terms of like, this is what somebody can be of that stature, right? I mean, he did Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was literally about a white woman bringing a black person home. So he was really big for me. I would say, in terms of mentor I have right now is a guy named Walt Greer, who's executive creative director of a company called VML. He's pretty much guided me a lot in terms of what we're doing from a business standpoint with Black Menswear to really kind of make impact from a strategy standpoint and really focusing on creating impact to make a diverse impact with some of the brands that we're working with. I would say those two. I would say my family, not just the individual, but my family in large, because like a lot of my family, like I grew in a unique situation. Like both my parents went to college. Like my mom got her master's from Smith, which is like the Holy Trinity, Smith, Vassar, Sarah Lawrence, like that's like the Holy Trinity of the East Coast. And she graduated valedictorian of her high school. But my parents are both old. Like my dad was born in 1948. So like, and my mom was born in 1941, so she went to high school at Segregated South. Yeah. So it's like, I remember thinking about those kind of things. It's like I grew up in generations with different lived experiences in terms of being that, to where those are kind of always indoctrinated to me. Like you have to make a greater impact in terms of doing things to kind of lead for the next generation after you. One of the things we always like to say is from June 19th, Juneteenth, 1865, which was like the last day of slavery, to the Voting Rights Act in 1965, to like, what are you doing to make impact to the next generation in 2065, so that now you kind of leave it in a better place of what you're doing now.
Oh. So two last questions I have are the future of Black Menswear and the future of Evan Marshall.
Ooh, good question there. Future of Black Menswear, we want to become the Black male multicultural content hub. So if you look at it in terms of like from a content perspective for Black female, you have all these content hubs. You have Ebony, Essence, Madame Noir, The Griot, Blavity. There's not a Black male content hub. to be fair, you do have GQ, and to GQ's credit, they're very diverse. I mean, they even had back-to-back covers. They had Zendaya and Megan Thee Stallion one year. So, like, they are great, but there's enough room at the table for us. Yep. So one of the things we're doing, we just came out with a documentary for a hat that we dropped last week. We have a Father's Day documentary coming out. So that's really kind of what we have a podcast. We're in the middle of a season. We have a YouTube series. So that's really, we got to focus on getting the content out there with that aspect. Personally, it's funny. I was watching this. I saw this clip on Instagram the other day, and it was people always ask you like, where do you want to be in 5 years? Yeah. But the guy was like, rather than asking them that question, it's like, how do you want to feel in 5 years?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
And that kind of really struck him guard, because at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't matter where you're at with this. It's like, do you want to feel like, are you happy? Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm at peace. My 3-year growth plan right now, like for this year is the year of infrastructure. Next year's the year of stability. And 2024 will be the year of expansion. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I'm just leading my life right now. It's infrastructure, stability, into expansion. So that's kind of what's focused on for me moving forward.
Well, for our listeners, where could they find out more about you and more about Black Menswear?
Yes. So we're at Black Menswear on Instagram. We are blackmenswear.com. Those would be our main 2 platforms. You can check us out. We have a YouTube page, Black Menswear as well, Facebook, Twitter, all those lovely platforms. Yeah. Encourage to follow us, tap in, check us out, like, subscribe, do all those lovely things. Yeah. Things we have coming out. We just had a hat come out called A Moment in Time. It's a brim similar to this one. It is not.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that hat. That's a cool
We have one similar to this one. We have a wine coming out in April called The Gentleman. It's a Cab and Syrah blend. So that'll be delicious. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Yeah. Those are kind of the main things we got coming out. Obviously, if you want to check out our flash mob too, our first stop will be March 24th. We will be in New Orleans, Louisiana to kick it off. So in the Big Easy. So that's kind of what we're starting off on.
All right. And as we wrap up, is there anything you want to leave us with before we finish up here?
Yes. I like to say, always remember that the best of me and the worst of me is the same me.
All right. I'm going to have to think about that one for a little bit. But thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you bringing a little bit more style and class into our nonprofit here. Definitely inspiring, just that in general, as well as the conversation. So, Evan, thank you so much for your time today, and we're really excited to share the work of Black Menswear and try to drive more engagement than you all are already crushing at. So,
happy to be here. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you know of a great organization or individual leaving a positive impact, we'd love to tell their story. Check us out and contact us at gtzp.org. Don't forget, for more stories like this, you could also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Instagram followers, our link trees in the bio. And for podcast listeners, we are on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for listening, and see you again soon.